Hey, folks, a very brief note on periodization when we're talking about political theory. This is a rough periodization. Different philosophers will fit into these molds in different ways. But what we're talking about when we talk about periodization is that there are basic themes and debates and discussions and often assumptions that dominate a certain period and the thinkers who are in conversation with each other during that period. So, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, part of the ancient tradition, they're concerned with the good life, right? A good life, a specific one. Connected to that is an idea of truth, that there is one right way of being, one best way of doing things. An interest in virtue and in character, and an idea that institutions should improve people, that human nature and human virtue is something that is somewhat fluid and should be fit to an ideal of the best. Attached to that is the idea also that that community is essential because it is the thing that is best able um, to perfect people, right? That is the point, is that individuals need to be considered within a community. Community is primary because that community holds out the opportunity to perfect people. The medieval period, which we kind of skipped over, concerned with all these same things: the good life, virtue, in this sense, Christian virtue, designing our institutions so that they improve character, so that they perfect the soul. The idea of one truth, in this case, a religiously framed Christian truth. So there's a lot of commonality between the ancient and the medieval. The source of truth and the understanding of what the virtuous good life is differ, the content, but the approach to philosophy in the ancient and medieval very similar. And there are other things, right? There are other things like the idea of cyclical history in ancient political thought and in Plato. That's a common theme in a lot of ancients. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone who is writing and discussing and debating during that time agrees with that, but those are the sort of ways that debates are framed. So in the modern um, era, and we have this debate over who is really the first modern. Is it Machiavelli, or does he have too much in common with the ancients? Is it he rejects tradition, he takes the state and the individual as they are, as sort of the focus of politics, but he also he considers, in terms of republicanism, institutions perfecting and improving the virtue of citizens, and so he considers history a little bit cyclical. Is he maybe a little bit too ancient? But he also rejects tradition in many ways. He believes in science, right? So these kinds of concerns that start to dominate in the modern era, things like liberty and freedom. We hear a lot about liberty and freedom as concerns. We hear about human rights and inherent human rights of individuals, right? So both liberty, freedom, choice, human rights. This takes the individual as a major focus instead of the community, as you see in older political thought. The state emerges as a political unit as opposed to, say, again, the community. The modern state becomes a focus. Power, the focus on power relations as sort of the dominant element of political life is something that's very modern. And, along with this, the idea that democracy, now, not everyone, Hobbes is not into democracy. Does that make him not modern? Do we not get, he's not into human rights? Does that make him not modern? Or is the fact that he is interested in choice in terms of the social contract, that he's interested in the state that he's interested in the idea of progress. And we can discuss that when we get to Hobbes. That's an important part that's often overlooked. He's interested in the individual in the sense that the individual joins the contract. He's interested in power. Hobbes is very modern in all of these senses, but not into democracy, not into human rights, not into liberty in the sense that we're used to. What he is interested in, and what Machiavelli sort of straddles the line on this issue, is this idea that institutions should take human nature as it is instead of trying to perfect it. And the way we achieve progress as a society is by building institutions that work within human nature and harness it or account for it in ways that allow us to work together despite the flaws and conflicts inherent in human nature. And so one thing, though, that is notable about the modern period is that there are still ideas of best answers or a right way to be. That a legitimate state is this or that. The best state is this or that. Is still an idea that occurs in modernity. In the contemporary era, which, what do we consider to be contemporary? 20th century and on, maybe? We start to move to this idea of pluralism, which is which is no one best way of being, but many ways that different individuals might want to live their lives. And an idea of you live your life and I live my life starts to emerge. Some of that certainly exists. John Stuart Mill in the modern period. Mill, Marx considered to be modern thinkers, Burke considered to be a modern thinker. Still a concern for democracy, still a concern for human rights, but some additions. Critical theory here, right? So critical theory, post-structuralism, these ideas that universals and objectives, so objective visions of universal truth, that these always hide bias and they always hide power, right? So power continues, but people like Foucault talk about the way power is embedded in all of the structures, all of the ideas, and even the language of life. So I have down here POMO, which is an abbreviation for postmodern, the idea that language and idea structure our very ways of thinking, and that we need to be critical of the language we use and the way power structures sort of embed themselves in our very minds. Also an increasing focus, as we have in our discussion of decolonization, with critical theory from a race and gender, a critical race theory or a feminist theory approach that says, let's specifically look at the ways in which bias and power concerning race and gender is built into our ideas of how institutions work, what human nature is like, and all that kind of stuff. Postmodern and post-structuralist approaches in general reject the idea that there is any one natural way for anything to be. It's a very big focus on everything as socially constructed, and increasingly a lot of this thought is focused on the way language constructs our ideas of how we view the world. So yeah, I mean, there's a diversity of thought that appears under each of these guys. So with modern political thought, Hobbes and Rousseau disagree on a lot of stuff. Marx and Locke disagree on a lot of stuff. But the terms of the debate, roughly, I think it's still useful to talk about ancient, medieval, modern, contemporary. And it can be useful to ask ourselves, just sort of as a way to start discussion, what is so interesting about our modern era? What not our modern era, right? We might call ourselves in the contemporary era, but modernity. When does it start? What defines it? Is it the focus on the individual? Is it the focus on choice and liberty and freedom? Is it the focus on people as they are, as a science of politics, looking at people as they are, not as people who are changeable? Depending on that, you might consider the real start of modernity at one time or another. But it's just really, it's not something that we have to have a specific idea of, but it's an interesting point to start the discussion, to ask what is different and what is the same about the theorists that we are looking at. So just a basic idea of periodization here. Hope you guys found it interesting.